All righty, it's 12:16. I'm going to get moving. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I am the Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations here at Lehigh and your host today for this Mountain Talk. Just a couple choreography things before I introduce our speaker and get moving. We are being recorded. I have to say that legally, but also it's convenient for you if you have to drop off early or if you know a friend who signed up and can't be here today, they can look at it later. You can go on the website and share it later with people. And if you want to ask a question, which I highly, highly recommend because that's how these are so successful, Sean's going to talk for just a few minutes and give you an overview, and then we'll open it up to questions, and you'll put those in the chat. I think you all know how to do that, but just in case there is a box down on the bottom of your screen that says chat, just click that. I encourage you to send your question to everyone, not just the moderators and co-hosts, just so we can start a back channel and people can see what others are thinking. I will read those questions aloud to Sean so that he can focus on the answers and not squinting at the screen trying to read all of the comments. We'll go until there are no more questions or we hit 1 o'clock, whichever comes first. All right. So I'm really pleased to welcome Sean Daley. He is a professor and the director of the Institute of Indigenous Studies in the College of Health here at Lehigh. And he's going to talk to us today about the significance, the great significance of this Memorandum of Understanding between Lehigh and the Delaware Nation. What it means to us, what it means to the country, and what his role is in all of that. So, Sean, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone who's online with us today. I appreciate your time and coming to hear about what we're doing. I'd like to start a little bit of talk about the Institute for Indigenous Studies to kind of put the MOU with Delaware Nation into a greater context. So if you're not familiar with us, we came to Lehigh in August of 2020. We were two centers for American Indian Studies out in Kansas prior to coming to Lehigh. So in some respects, we've actually been around since 2006. When we came to Lehigh in 2020, we rebranded, combined efforts, and became the Institute. So our mission is to collaborate and partner with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nations, communities, organizations, so forth, to basically work on improving the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of Indigenous peoples. Historically, we focused on what's the United States, but since coming to Lehigh, we've kind of branched out to Indigenous peoples throughout the Americas and the Caribbean, with the hopes of actually working with Indigenous peoples around the world. Our logo actually does have some significance as far as Indigenous peoples go. It was designed by Luke Swimmer, who is Eastern Band Cherokee of North Carolina. He's a research scientist here in the Institute, but he also does graphic arts. And our logo is a basket, a Cherokee basket design, with Lehigh being the center gold piece and these other parts of the baskets representing Indigenous peoples of all the Americas. The colors he's chosen, green and gold, are earth tones, representing a connection to earth and good health. So again, our logo plays into our mission. There are quite a few of us here. We kind of break into main faculty and staff and affiliated. Pretty much everybody who is main faculty and staff have been with the Institute for probably close to a decade, going back to our roots in Kansas, minus Carly Camplain. She is a Comanche scholar who joined the faculty at Lehigh this year. She came here to work with us. She's faculty in the College of Health. Her area of focus is Indigenous health law and policy. So we're very glad to have Carly here. And we've picked up affiliated faculty since coming to Lehigh. This is something new we're doing now. And it's Indigenous scholars or non-Indigenous faculty who work on Indigenous issues. So as time goes on and we build what we're doing here at Lehigh, we expect this to grow. We have graduate students and we also have undergraduate students working here. And that's kind of one of the things we like is having students involved in our research, being graduate or undergraduate, so they can get, practical experiences, real life experiences, working on our research projects and working with Indigenous peoples. So like a lot of things at Lehigh, like a lot of things in academia, we are focused on three areas: research, education, and service. With us being a research institute, we do put a lot of our time and effort into our research. Again, we work with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities, but we also partner with other colleges, other universities, other academic institutions to work on Indigenous issues, to help them develop research methodologies and frameworks that are appropriate Indigenous communities. One of the things we get a lot of questions about is, there are people who work in Latino communities, there are people who work in African-American communities, and sometimes they want to take their projects and implement them in Indigenous communities. And honestly, the vast majority of times, it's going to be an epic fail. It's not going to work because a lot of the issues American Indians face are very different than the issues other marginalized groups face. And a lot of it has to do with colonization. A lot of it has to do with federal laws and policies. The Indian experience can be very, very different. And this is 3 College of Health students from about 2 years ago. We sent them to Gathering of Nations in New Mexico, which was one of the largest powwows in the United States, to help collect data for us and to interview Native people. So it was we sent 5 undergraduates at that point in time, obviously with people from the IIS, so they weren't on their own. But again, it was a great experience to be around several thousand American Indians for several days where they got to interact, see a lot of cultural traditions, but also gather data on behalf of the IIS. We do the education as well. We've developed several American Indian focused courses to getting at Lehigh. We currently have a minor in Indigenous Peoples Health in the College of Health. We have areas of focus in our bachelor's and graduate programs, with the hope as time goes on, developing more classes and developing more educational opportunities for both Native students and non-Native students. We're working on developing pipeline programs to bring Native high school students to Lehigh, working with different tribal colleges to potentially bring tribal college students to Lehigh. Again, education is an important part of what we do. And a couple of years ago, we brought a Cherokee stickball team to Lehigh. Stickball is kind of the precursor to modern lacrosse. And we brought a team up and they did a demonstration on the lacrosse field one evening about how traditional stickball is played, and got photos from that. We do service not only at Lehigh, but we go to Native communities, different reservations, rural communities, even urban communities, to work on education and health issues. That photos from a few years ago when we were up at Cheyenne River in South Dakota, doing a project with their Title I program. If you're not familiar with Title I, it serves kindergarten through 12th grade. And one of the things they do is a camp up there for students over the summer so that they have something to do. And also it gives them an opportunity to get meals. A lot of kids on this reservation have food security issues. So by working with them at this camp, and the camp in general gives these kids opportunities in the summer. So just a quick overview, some of the communities with whom we've worked. This is not an exhaustive list, but good representation. Prairie Band in Kansas, Cheyenne River in South Dakota, Kickapoo, Acoma Pueblo, Navajo Nation, Crow Agency, Hopi, Wind River, Pine Ridge. A lot of work west of the Mississippi River. Again, with us coming from Kansas, historically, we focused out west. Now that we're here, we're starting to work with groups here in the east, or at least groups who have ties, historical ties to the east. We've worked with tribal colleges as well. If you're not familiar with tribal colleges, these are usually two-year schools, which are on Indian reservations. They're usually run by the tribe, minus Haskell Indian Nations University on this list. That's a Bureau of Indian Education school run by the feds. Tribal colleges are open to anybody, native and non-native. They are just housed on reservations. The vast majority of their students are from that tribe usually, and they have a large focus on language revitalization, cultural revitalization. So a lot of their courses focus on the culture and traditions of that tribe. We work with urban Indian communities. The vast majority of American Indians today actually live in suburban and urban areas. And so in some of the cities that have high concentrations of Native people, Seattle, Flagstaff, Phoenix, Oklahoma City, you'll have urban Indian centers that provide different types of resources to Natives living in those communities. And so we've worked with community centers in Missouri, Kansas, South Dakota, and Arizona. Although limited, we have worked with some indigenous communities in Central and South America. One of our professors in the IIS, Joe Pacheco, he has ties to the Quechua from Bolivia. His dad's from one of those communities. So as we continue to develop here, we intend to work more and more in Central and South America. And one of our current PhD students is from Venezuela and has worked on issues with indigenous communities in the Amazon. So to bring it a little bit closer to Lehigh, this past year, we've established some partnerships, one of which that got recognition was our partnership with Delaware Nation from Oklahoma. We established a relationship with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. We've worked with the Watershed Coalition of Lehigh Valley. We co-sponsored a conference here at Lehigh in March that had a significant indigenous focus on indigenous issues, particularly some of which surrounded water rights. And we started working with some of the school districts in Pennsylvania to help them develop more culturally appropriate education programs concerning Native peoples in Pennsylvania. So part of what we're here to talk about today is the MOU with Delaware Nation of Oklahoma. Not that it's all that big and pretty, but the Delaware's version of it is here on the screen. This is the one that came from their tribal council. Ours is the Lehigh version of it's a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for, legal. So basically the idea behind it is pretty simple. Delaware Nation is the tribal nation from this area. There are actually 5 recognized Delaware groups, 3 in the US, 2 in Canada. The 3 in the US are recognized by the federal government. That's Delaware Nation in Oklahoma, Delaware Tribe in Oklahoma, and Stockbridge-Munsee in Wisconsin. They constitute the Lenape or Delaware peoples from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, parts of what's now Delaware State, parts of New York, that over time, for different reasons, moved to different parts of the United States, or in the case of a couple of the groups, moved up to Canada. So they are recognized in Canada as a legit American Indian group, and they have reserves in Canada. So the MOU we signed with is only with Delaware Nation. Again, they are the ones particularly from Lehigh Valley. Basically what the MOU says is that we as an institution, Lehigh, them as a tribal nation, we are going to partner, we are going to work together on different projects that give Lehigh students, faculty, and staff opportunities to work with Delaware Nation. And we are going to work to help Delaware Nation on certain projects that benefit them. like one of which is giving them an office on Lehigh's campus for what's called a THPO, or Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. What a THPO does is represent the tribe with like local, state, governmental agencies, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes businesses. It's kind of liaison between the tribe and non-tribal entities. So in the Institute here, which if you don't know, we have a little house over on Broadhead across from Alumni Memorial. In our building, we have an office that is actually Delaware Nation office, where their tribal historic preservation officer in Lehigh Valley comes, works, brings people to campus, and works on Delaware Nation issues. So as we go down the road, more and more work with Delaware Nation is part of this MOU. Again, it's just a formal way of recognizing that we are working with them, they are going to work with us. And as far as we know, there are not a lot of MOUs between tribal nations and universities in the United States. We've not been able to find an exact number, but again, I've been working, me alone, I've been working with tribal communities since 1993. All of us here have experience working with tribal communities, and this is not a common thing to have an MOU. So we were very glad to partner with Delaware Nation to do this. Again, formalizing that relationship is not always done. One of the things we did too was work with a Delaware Nation tribal member named Daniel Strongwalker Thomas to get a piece of artwork on our campus. And what this artwork does is it kind of mirrors the MOU. What you're looking at here on the screen is a very small version of that artwork. It's the image in the center that looks like a face is called the Masink. It's a spirit, a really important supernatural being in Delaware tradition. They are red and black in color. They represent the spirit of nature. And what you're looking at on there is little pieces of maps that talk about Delaware movement. And one of the pictures is of Lehigh Valley, and the other, that's by the wording Oklahoma, is where they are today. And so what this is representing the relationship between Lehigh and the Delaware Nation through the lens of a Masink, of a nature spirit. And it's made out of what are called prayer ties, red and black pieces of cotton cloth where cedar and tobacco are put into them when you pray, and they are kind of an offering. So prayer ties were made, offerings were made to spirit world. They were then taken apart and incorporated into this piece of art. And if you haven't seen it yet, it is at the entrance to Linderman Library. The artwork is there, a description of what it is by the artist is there, but it's also in Delaware. It's in Lenape. So it's in English, and then next to it, it's in the Lenape language, both written and audio-wise. So there's a little link that if you click on it, it'll be read to you in the Lenape language. And again, that is something that has not been done a lot. Artwork that is both in English and that tribe's native language, but we took it a step further and hired a translator from Delaware Nation, a guy named Nick Logan. And he went into a studio and had it done, recorded properly. So it's not something done on a cell phone. It was done in a professional recording studio. So it's good quality. Luag did a really good job at getting this frame, setting it all up. This was done with Luag, LTS, Henry Odie's office. This artwork was a big undertaking among multiple offices, departments, programs here at Lehigh. So again, I prefer to answer questions, talk to you guys. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we've done. Again, there's more to it, but this will get us started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So before we started, I told Sean that one of the measures of success of these webinars are how many questions and how engaged the audience is. So already we are successful because we have several excellent questions for you. So I will read through them, and the first one is from Jocelyn, who's asking, do you partner with nonprofit organizations as well? You mentioned a bunch of partnerships, and if you can just spend a couple minutes talking about those.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been doing a lot of work. We've done a couple of events with Nurture Nature Center over in Easton. We've done 2 film showings with them. We've done a couple panels. We've had some preliminary discussions with, I'm blanking on the name and I apologize, Camel Hump Farm here in northern Bethlehem. They want to do some Lenape projects. And so my office and Delaware Nation, we've been out there to talk to them about things we can work on. So yeah, we absolutely, historically out in Kansas, we did a lot of work with nonprofits here. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Awesome. Jean asks, what's the most prevalent problem in the lives of Indigenous peoples in the U.S. today? And in 30 seconds or less, what's the solution?
Oh, wow. That is a brutally hard question. I mean, we're dealing with so many problems. It's not even funny. One of the communities we work with, a third of the reservation still lacks infrastructure, no paved roads, no running water, no electricity, no sewage.
Wow.
Healthcare is abysmal. Basic services you can't even get. You know, there's doctor shortages, there's nurses shortages, there's money shortages. We have a joke. It's a sad joke, but there's a saying, don't get sick after June, because the federal government that provides services to American Indians, healthcare, IHS, they typically run out of money by June. So if you go in there with a problem after June, there's no money. They can't help you. Educational attainment among American Indians is the lowest of any racial, ethnic, political group. I mean, we have a whole host of problems. The solution, there is no solution, I'm sad to say. The way we look at this is we can't solve these problems, so we have to take the wins one by one. If we can get an Indian kid in high school to even consider college and go to college, that's a win. If we can get somebody into healthcare that doesn't have access to healthcare for one reason or another, that's a win. So dealing with the systemic problems is one issue. So we often look at it, how can we help this individual? How can we help this community? Because if you look at it as how do you change the system, it's overwhelming. You'll just throw your hands up and walk away. I'm sorry to say, but that is the truth.
Yeah. I'm going to jump down to Rochelle's question because it relates to something you just said. She said, in terms of the MOU, has Lehigh engaged in any conversations regarding providing educational opportunities and scholarships to prospective students who want to study here? And further to that, I was wondering, you mentioned there's several associate degree colleges out there. Is there any transfer discussion with the admissions about transfer students?
Yep, we have been working with both admissions and Henry Odie's office. There are some alumni who are interested in starting scholarships. We are in the early stages of talking with some tribal colleges about 2+2 programs. So they'll do the first 2 years, get their associates, and then come here and finish up. So yes, early stages, talks are in the works, but this is new to Lehigh. We're not dealing with a school like the University of Arizona, who's had Native students for several decades now. We're not dealing with in a situation like that. So some of what we have to do is local education on the issues in Indian country, some of the issues Native students face. And yes, we've had those conversations. Admissions is involved, diversity is involved, DAR is involved in some of these. So yes, the conversations are underway. Is it going to happen immediately? No, but we are working on it.
Okay, good to hear. David asks, is the Secretary of the Department of Interior, Deb Haaland, aware of the efforts at Lehigh, and is she involved in any way?
No. Is she's aware of what we're doing? Maybe. I don't know. Do we really deal with people in her position? Not too much, to be honest with you. It gets it gets weird sometimes, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but sometimes when you do this type of community work, if you align with too many federal agencies, it can throw red flags up to communities. They start to question why you're there, what you're doing there, what you're doing with the info. So we try to stay as much as we can neutral as far as things like that go, with the idea of first and foremost, our relationship is with the community. And again, if somebody hears about what they do from a federal government, a state government, will we work with them? Yeah, but we don't go out and necessarily knock on those doors and try to establish those relationships. We focus more with the local Native communities.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, David has a question about, has the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma experienced similar difficulties as the Osage Nation that was highlighted by the book by David Gann and the recent movie?
Not that I know of. Osage got hit really, really hard with that. He's talking about Killers of the Flower Moon. To be honest with you, I haven't seen the movie yet. I plan to. I read the book when it came out a few years ago. We had some dealings with Osage when we were out in Kansas. Great experiences working with them. They got hit really hard because of oil. Have other tribes gotten hit that way? Navajo Nation has gotten hit really hard because of uranium, particularly in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Some of the tribes up in South Dakota have gotten hit. The murder of indigenous people to that level, no, that's really an Osage thing. Have tribal communities been lost their land, lost resources, lost money because of water, uranium, oil, coal? Absolutely. The murder situation in Osage, to my knowledge, that's unique. That is unique. The only corollary we have potentially is the whole missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls epidemic. If you're not familiar with it, American Indian women go missing at between 8 to 10 times the rate of any racial and ethnic group, any other women from a racial and ethnic group in the United States. A lot of it ties to sex trafficking, forced prostitution, things like that. But that's not tied to a particular tribe. That's Indigenous women as a whole.
Wow.
That's a good question, David. But Delaware, the one thing they may have the record on, and I'm speaking kind of loosely, before they ended up in Oklahoma, where they are now, I believe they were moved 18 times. Since leaving Pennsylvania before ending up in Oklahoma, the federal government moved them to 18 different locations before they ended up in Oklahoma. And I think that might be a record.
Well, and the answer that you gave to the last question now makes even more sense of why they might be wary if they knew you were partnering with the federal government, you know.
And that's a lot of tribes. I hate to say that. Historically, there's been problems, and even today, there are problems. You know, and I mean, the federal government forcibly sterilized American Indian women up into the mid-1970s. Full religious freedom of American Indians was not granted until preliminary freedom, 1978, full freedom, not really until 1994. So, I mean, we're talking a lot of people's lifetimes. I was around, you know, I was born in 73. So I was around when religious freedoms being finally granted.
Right, right. So Eric's question then is perfect timing. And I also want to ask a follow-up question to this, but he says, what's the most appropriate way to acknowledge and engage with the complex history of relations between descendants of settler peoples and descendants of indigenous peoples in the Lehigh Valley, realizing that those land acknowledgements are a common but somewhat fraught approach? What do you recommend?
I'm going to be honest with you. I think land acknowledgements are performance art. At the end of the day, people who put them on their emails, read them before things, 9 out of 10 times they're not engaging with Native communities. They're saying it to make themselves feel better. As far as that question goes, that's kind of a hard question. I'll give my example. I'm not Native. I'm Irish Catholic. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I didn't meet a Native person that I know was Native, at least someone who said they were. So I was in college. So, I was a sophomore in college when I started to learn about this stuff, and I took advantage of it, moved out west, and spent, up until I came back here, a long time out west, living and working with these communities. Do I acknowledge there is a really complex relationship between, non-natives and natives? Yeah, there is. And it's not just white people. It's complex for African Americans. It's complex for Latinos. It's complex for Asians. So it's anybody. But at the end of the day, I don't hold myself accountable for what settlers did. I can't. I wasn't around. I don't hold my Native colleagues responsible for what their relatives might have done during Indian wars and stuff like that. I acknowledge it. I acknowledge that there's issues today. So I work on those issues that are a problem today. I can't make right what was done 250, 300 years ago. I acknowledge their issues. I acknowledge their problems, but what can we do about it today? Yeah. That's my approach. And for me, that's been a healthy approach because I've seen white guilt do horrible things. It sets up a bad relationship when you're trying to work with Native people. And that's my opinion. I know people disagree with me, but as a non-Native who's been able to do this for almost 30 years now, I gotta say my approach works for me.
Yeah, that's great. My question was a little more simplistic, I guess. I want to make sure that I get the words right. And I've heard you use Indian, Native American, Indigenous. Can you just help me understand when to use which so that I can be sensitive, but also not performance art, as you said?
To be honest with you, it's somewhat regional. So for example, my master's degree is in American Indian Studies. I went to University of Arizona, got an MA in American Indian Studies. There are schools that do degrees in Indigenous Studies. Mm-hmm. There are degrees that do Native Studies. So it's somewhat regional. Mm-hmm. Certain parts of the US, you find Native American being used more. Certain parts, you find American Indian. Indigenous is somewhat new in the sense that it's really come out of academia, and the people using it in the community are acknowledging their relationship with Indigenous peoples from the Caribbean, from Australia, from Africa. And, one of the things we talk about is, for a long time, we talked about British settlers. We've talked about French settlers. A lot of those laws that were used by the British settlers here in the US and Canada, those same laws existed in Australia. Those same laws existed in Africa. So Indigenous recognizes that complex colonialism at the global level. Okay. So I think what I'm saying is there's no right or wrong word. It's very contextual, and it's also what people prefer. So often when I'm in a Native community, I use the word they use. So for example, when I'm out on Navajo, I say Dene, because that's what they call themselves. They are the Dene. When I'm out in South Dakota on Pine Ridge or Cheyenne River, it's Lakota, because that's the term they use themselves. When I talk about the greater affiliation of Native people in the US, I might just ask, hey, what do you guys use around here? Do you use Native? Do you use Native American? Do you use Indian? Do you use American Indian? And just let people lead the way and just follow local tradition, local culture. And again, 9 out of 10 times, just ask somebody. They're not going to get salty about it. They're going to be honest and help you out.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. So Tom was responding to Eric's question and says, I have something I do in my context. He's a teacher's ed instructional that has students map and then reflect on their travels and personal observation or erasure of the Indigenous peoples who previously lived on the lands. I have a write-up I can share in case that's helpful. So Tom, if you want to send that to to me or to Bryce, just respond to the email that we've sent you, and we can share that with Sean and any others that are interested. Michelle Spicer says, thank you so much for the great work you do here. We're lucky to have the Institute. I'm wondering if you see a role for collaboration with more environmental related faculty. She's a new forest ecology faculty. Even if our research teaching service is not directly related to human health, what would you suggest for early career people starting out trying to do more socially and Indigenous conscious research, especially as non-Indigenous scholars?
We are actually trying to get some people over in the College of Health with that interest, that focus, that environmental health focus, particularly from the Indigenous angle. I will say that is a hot area where Indigenous students have an interest, is going into environmental issues, particularly how it relates to not only human health, but animal health, natural health, even cultural health. You know, a lot of artistic traditions, a lot of foods are tied to things available in the environment. You know, you're not going to be able to run to Whole Foods or Giant and get some of these things. So that is a big area where Native students themselves have an interest. And the interesting thing about it is, or one of the things we like about it is, there's different ways cultures know things and experience things. And so you can have an environmental scientist talk about these things from an academic perspective, but you can also have a Native who has a PhD in environmental science talk about these things from his culture or her culture's perspective. So I see a lot of schools, and Minnesota is one of the schools that I think is doing it really well. They'll have courses taught by a mainstream academic and a Native academic where they're talking about ecological issues. They're talking about water rights. They're talking about, you know, cleaning water and things like that, but they're talking about it and they're engaging all the students from these different perspectives. So I think actually what I'm saying is, if you want to talk to us, we'll be happy to get you in touch with people we know who do those types of issues. And actually Joe Pacheco here, who works in Bolivia, that's one of his areas of interest, is environmental issues in Bolivia and how it affects Indigenous people there. He has a big interest in water, particularly how plastics are affecting water in Bolivia.
Yeah. Bella Ann is asking, are you in contact with the CDC on health issues and opportunities for laboratory careers?
No, I'll be honest with you, no. Getting natives to go into those sciences that have, you know, biology, chem, a lot of those areas, it's a slow process. I know Lehigh is working on that, is very interested in that. There are a lot of cultural traditions that come into play, taboos about dealing with human tissue, blood, certain viruses. Can it be done? Yeah, but I think there has to be some more, what we in my field would kind of refer to like cultural tailoring, taking these things and making, you know, both the people we want to go into it as well as the teachers and stuff like that. Are there natives who work at the CDC? Oh yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of communicable diseases on reservations that don't exist anywhere else. So for example, tuberculosis is out of control on reservations. We still have plague outbreaks on reservations. We have hantavirus on the Navajo Reds. So I mean, we have a lot of public health problems that the CDC is involved in on reservations. But 9 out of 10 times, it's not going to be a native scholar or researcher from the CDC coming out to deal with the people or collect the samples. That's been a slow area of engagement.
Do a lot of the students, the Native students that study at universities, go back to their reservations, to their homelands, or is that a problem where they're not returning?
It's both. And I know that's a bad answer. Some people go back. It's usually the people who go into education and law because they can work in their communities. A lot of people who do the more sciencey stuff can't because there's not job opportunities. The other problem we have, and I'm being brutally honest about this, is you're sometimes not welcome back. there's what we call crabs in the bucket syndrome, and that's what we actually call it, is this idea of you go home, you're now educated, you don't fit in the community. You're seen as a sellout. A lot of people from urban areas experience that thing too. The vast majority of Native students are first-gen students. Their moms and dads haven't gone to college. And it's this idea of, well, you forgot who you are. So they'll often work in an Indigenous community, but it's not going to be theirs.
Wow.
Because there's this weird dynamic. And like I said, we've seen it in urban areas too, but it's very prevalent on reservations. And that's one of the things we're working on, is to change that mindset. And people who have gone into elementary and secondary ed, people who have gone into law, they can go home and make those connections a little easier. They can fight for their communities. They can teach in the schools. So we're hoping as time goes on that it trickles into the sciences, it trickles into other areas, and that acceptance when you go home is there. But again, the problem we have is, even if your community is willing to accept you, there's very often not jobs. I'll throw a staggering statistic out. I know we need to wrap up, but one of the communities we work in South Dakota has an unemployment rate of 85%.
Wow.
85.
Wow. That's, yeah. What do you do with that?
Yeah, honestly, you're going to go home. If you get a job, it's going to be for the tribe. If it's not for the tribe, it's going to be for Dollar General, Family Dollar, Dairy Queen. It's going to be a service job.
Yeah.
So what's your impetus to go to college at that point?
Right, right.
So we're dealing with a lot of that too.
All right. We have time for one more question. There are a bunch of great comments here that we will send you, Sean, when we're
Thank
done
you.
here. But I have one more question from Jocelyn that I think is really interesting. What are your thoughts on the state of Arizona's Medicaid insurance system covering traditional Native medicinal practices?
I think that's awesome for a couple reasons. One, cultural preservation. I know that's been tried on the Navajo res previously with hospitals and clinics, bringing in traditional healers. And it's been well received. I don't think the program exists anymore. I think there are funding issues. I will be honest, I'm not totally in line with what you're talking about. I don't know all the details, but I do think that is really, really important, because there are a lot of people who still want to seek out traditional healers. And if it's going to be covered through, a payment system, great, let's do it. I mean, we cover acupuncture, we cover other modalities, and why not traditional Native medicine? I think that's a good thing.
Right. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sean. This has been wonderful. And like I said, there's a bunch of comments here agreeing with me that this was really helpful and educational. I think there's a few faculty members on here that would like to connect with you afterwards to partner. But fantastic. I learned a lot, which is fantastic for me personally. And I really, really appreciate the time that you spent today. So thank you. And thank you, everybody else. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.